Hi, I'm Ms Hearn. Let's get started. In this video, we're going to talk about how to set up a truth table for the compound statement negation of P and Q and R and not Q. So the first thing you want to do when you're setting up a truth table, which by the way is just a list of all the possible scenarios of truth values, is you're going to look at the components, the letters, and you want to identify the unique letters. So for example, P, Q, and R in this case, we don't have to say Q twice. It's the same statement and our component statement. And what we're going to do is list P, Q, and R as our components. We're going to list all the possible scenarios as far as truth or false for these three components. So the easiest way to do that is this first column where you have P, or whatever your first component statement is, will be half truths and half falses. And then your second column is going to be where P it was true, half of those are going to be true for Q and half are going to be false. And where P was false, half of those are going to be true for Q and half of those are going to be false. And then again, where Q was true, half of those are going to be true and half of those are false for R. Where Q is false, half of those are going to be true and half of those false. That way we get every possible outcome. In order to get the rest of the truth table, you have to set up more headings besides just P, Q, and R. We're going to use the technique of setting up an individual heading for each of the connectives. We have a negation, and then an and joining the P and Q, an and joining the two sets of parentheses, an and joining the R, and the negation of Q, and then we have this negation being applied to the Q. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different connectives. You are always going to have one column for each of the components and then one column for each of those 5 connectives. 8 columns in this diagram. 1, 2, and 3 would be the P, Q, and R columns. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 would be the remaining columns, with the 8th one being the entire statement. So let's talk about what those column headings would look like. We're trying to use each one of these columns to analyze one of the connectives. Usually we start working inside the parentheses first. From left to right, the first set of parentheses has P and Q in it, only one connective. So we're going to write P and Q here for the heading for column 4. Then working our way out of those parentheses, we have a negation of that. So we're going to write negation of P and Q. Notice that in column 5, there's only one new connective that needs to be analyzed. We will have previously analyzed the and in the previous column. Now we're going to work inside the next parentheses, and inside those parentheses we have an and a negation. The negation comes first as far as the order in which we perform it, so we're going to do negation first, and then in column 7 we have to do the and part. Noticing again in column 7 there are 2 connectives, but the only one that hasn't previously been analyzed is this and. Column 8's got to have the whole statement, and what's the only connective that hasn't been analyzed yet? This one. So in column 8, that's the one new connective. These others were all analyzed in the previous columns. All right, so now that we have our plan of how we're going to analyze the truth values of the connectives, we are going to go column by column and do so. So to analyze column 4, which is an and statement, P and Q, we have to remember an and statement is only true if both components are true. We also need to focus in on our first 2 columns that have the truth values for P and Q. So using this rule in columns 1 and 2, we can see that the only time we have 2 truths happens to be in the first 2 rows here. So we know there will be truths in the first 2 rows, and then it's going to be falses everywhere else. Moving on to column 5, we need to remember that we're performing a negation. What are we negating? We're negating what we got in column 4. The rule for negation is the opposite truth value. So we're going to look at column 4, P and Q. We want the opposite of that. So we're going to have the opposite of truths will be falses, and the opposite of falses will be truths. Now in column 6, we're analyzing the negation of Q. Where are the truth values for Q? Back in column 2. We again want to just do the opposite of every truth value. So for example, in column 2, we have Q being true for the first 2 rows. So in the first 2 rows here, we must have falses. Then we have 2 falses, so we must have truths. Then we have 2 truths, so we must have 2 falses. Then we have 2 falses, so we must have 2 trues. Now we want to analyze R and not Q. Remember, the and is the new part of this that has not yet been analyzed. We already analyzed the negation of Q in the previous statement. So which 2 columns are we actually joining with an and? The 3rd column, which was R, and the 6th column, which is negation of Q. And the rule for and is it's only true if both components are true. So you're going to look through and see where in columns 3 and 6 you have 2 trues. So for example, in row 3 we have a true and a true, and in row 7 we have a true and a true. And those are the only 2 places, so those will be the only entries that will be true and the rest will be false. Finally, we get to column 8. The only new connective is the and in the middle. Everything else has already been analyzed. Which 2 columns are we joining with that and? We're joining column 5 and we're joining column 7. And the rule for and is still only true if both are true. So looking through columns 5 and 7, we see, for example, in row 3, they're both true. In row 7, they're both true, but nowhere else. So we would have to put a true and a true in column 8, and everything else would be false. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please remember to like it. That helps other students to find the video.